afterwards. And so what I'm going to do here, okay, so first of all, thank you for joining us tonight during Laudato Si week as we celebrate the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's landmark encyclical, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. We will explore struggles faced by communities impacted by environmental injustices and what Laudato Si, which highlights the dual cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, calls us to do in the face of these injustices. Within society, there have been two different environmental movements: the mainstream environmental movement, largely comprised of white people, and the environmental justice movement, led in large part by communities of color. While both groups care about the environment is defined by context. As a 2014 Grist article put it, we define nature by what we see when we look outside. What a Black child from Southside Chicago sees through her glass will be very different than what a white child sees from her window in South Burlington, Vermont. And communities impacted the worst by environmental pollution have said that they know firsthand that social justice is routinely ignored in the mainstream movement's decision-making. And that's not to say that it's only a Black-white divide, but that is how it is largely divided in this country. So environmental justice was actually addressed during the first Earth Day in 1970. Gary Nabin, an ecumenical Franciscan brother who was involved in the first Earth Day, offered walking the Franciscan way toward the 50th Earth Day reflections every day for over a month leading up to Earth Day 2020. In one of his reflections, he shared that Chicano activist Arturo Sandoval, the only person of color on Earth Day's national organizing team, engaged communities of color in the Earth Day events as he saw it as an extension of his racial justice and peace work. On Earth Day in 1970, he led a march of Mexicans, New Mexicans, and Indigenous through Albuquerque and a rally to force the closure of a solid waste treatment plant in a Latino neighborhood. Receiving national TV coverage on NBC, ABC, and CBS that very day, it led to the closure and relocation of the solid waste plant, becoming the first explicit environmental justice success of the environmental movement. So during this 5th anniversary year of Laudato Si, we hope to instill a desire among people of faith and care for creation committees to join together with communities impacted by environmental injustices in advocating for the changes these communities know are needed for improving health and well-being. We will first hear from Dr. Adrienne Hollis, Senior Climate Justice and Health Scientist at Union of Concerned Scientists. Dr. Hollis develops and implements projects to document health impacts of climate change on communities of color and ensures scientific information from UCS is communicated in a culturally competent and helpful manner to vulnerable populations. Next, we'll hear from Roberto Jesus Clack, Associate Director of Warehouse Workers for Justice, a worker center dedicated to fighting for stable, family-supported jobs in one of Chicagoland's most important industries. He has worked for over a decade organizing with low-income tenants, veterans, and workers to fight for justice, and will share from his perspective on the front lines of an environmental justice struggle. We'll then hear from Karen Russell from the Sunrise Movement, who will guide us in thinking about why we must get involved with solidarity, even and especially if we are not experiencing environmental injustices firsthand. Luke Henkel will then share with us some reflections from Laudato Si, so we can respond from a place grounded in faith and spirituality, and then we'll walk through the beginning stages of thinking about how to respond, including with Dr. Cliff Cochran from Physicians for Social Responsibility. We'll have a Q&A after each individual speaker, so if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we will have the panelists answer them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Adrienne Hollis.
Thank you, Kelly. And thanks to you and Luke for the invitation. I'll now share my slides. So I'll be talking about environmental justice and why it's important to everyone and how it is applicable to everybody. Before I do that, a little bit about myself, other than the great intro that Kelly gave me. I'm originally from Mobile, Alabama, one of the most polluted and racially unjust areas in Alabama, in the country. And I lived there until I went to college. And I have, I'm an environmental toxicologist. I have a PhD in inhalation toxicology, and I also have a law degree. I'm an environmental attorney. I currently, as Kelly said, work as the Senior Climate Justice and Health Scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where I've been for about 1.5 years. And prior to that, I was the Director of Federal Policy at We Act for Environmental Justice in its Washington, D.C. office. My first interaction, I think, with environmental justice from this side of the fence occurred when I was doing my postdoc at Harvard School of Public Health. And we started looking at some targeting in advertising. And in that instance, it was around cigarette smoking, but that sort of ignited my interest or my concern about how populations were targeted or steered into areas that might not be as safe as other areas. I will also tell you a little bit about my organization, which is, if I can get this to, so I work at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where we help citizens and elected officials find the best ways to respond to the consequences of climate change, and also to cut our oil use in half and to ramp up renewable energy. And I'm going to take a minute because I forgot to. So our staff includes scientists, engineers, economists, and analysts. And we also work with about 125,000 scientists and technical experts across the country who volunteer to work with the Union of Concerned Scientists. And we have about 500,000 members. We're a pretty inclusive community, and we really work to educate the public and inform decisions that are critical to our health, safety, and the environment. So next, to talk about specifically what is the environment, which I think is a very important question. Let's make sure we're on the same page about what exactly the environment is. If you look it up, the definition will say it's the circumstances, objects, and conditions that one is surrounded by, right? Or it's the complex of physical, chemical, and biotic factors such as climate, soil, and living things that act upon an organism like a human. So everything falls under the environment, from the air we breathe every moment, the water we use in our daily routines, plants and animals around us. And it plays an important role, as you know, in healthy living of human beings. Now, the way environment is defined by most people, most communities, is that it's where you work, play, pray, go to school, as well as our physical and our natural environment, right? So a little bit about what environmental justice is after that. So EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of people regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And then fair treatment means that no group of people, including racial, ethnic, socioeconomic groups, should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences that result from industry, from municipal and commercial operations, or from the execution of federal, state, local, and tribal policies and procedures, right? So I put this definition up here. This is from a colleague of mine who's now retired, Dr. Bunyan Bryant, who's the director of the Environmental Advocacy Program at the School of Natural Resources and the Environment at the University of Michigan. And he defines it as all people, respecting every cultural norm, all of our values, how we work together, how we have been raised, how we grow up, I think I said our traditions, in order to be sustainable, in order to not just survive, but to thrive. It includes decent paying jobs, which we've seen through this pandemic, the importance of that, decent paying and safe jobs, quality schools and recreation, affordable housing, and that communities where culture and diversity are respected and welcome. And that is the definition of environmental justice that I prefer. So simply put, it means that everyone, not just the people who can vote and move away from threats, or individuals who can afford lawyers or experts and lobbyists to fight on their behalf, but everyone is entitled to equal protection and equal enforcement of the environmental health, housing, land use, transportation, energy, and civil rights and laws and regulations. And it's not just about race. And most people believe that it is. Oh, environmental justice is a Black thing. You know, it isn't. And it actually started with our Native American brothers and sisters. But what it includes is poor people, people who are oppressed and who have not been given an opportunity to participate in processes that will affect their health. So the root of the issue, the guiding principle of environmental justice is that everyone is entitled to equal protection, not equal pollution, but equal protection. So a lot of people misunderstand and think that what you're saying is that if one party bears a disproportionate amount of pollution, that we should spread that out. That's not what environmental justice says. It says that everybody is entitled to a clean environment, which is exactly the opposite. And income does matter for pollution purposes, as I mentioned earlier about socioeconomic status, but race is the higher determinant, but not the only determinant. So the environmental justice movement is grassroots, which means that it started in the community and it continues in the community, although others have taken up that mantle to fight for fairness across the board. So I like to describe now I'm almost finished. I like to describe environmental justice as an umbrella, right? So envision environmental justice as an umbrella, and all of the different entities under it are those spokes you see there. So I wondered if people could just quickly jot in the chat room what you think might fall under environmental justice, given the definition that I gave you, that it encompasses where we live, eat, work, play, and pray, and everything else in our physical and biological environment. So maybe we can get some input from the audience here. And I can't see the chat room, so I'll have to have somebody read those out to me.
Yep, so feel free to put into the chat some of your ideas, and then I'll go along reading them out as they come in. And if you don't mind repeating the question again, Adrienne? Yeah,
so what areas of concern will fall under environmental justice? As I said, it's the umbrella, and your environment is where you live, work, pray, play, go to school, and interact with your physical and biological environment. So what are some topics that have been, that are issues of concern?
Great. Yep, we've got carbon footprints, air and water. We've got ethical wages, clean air and water, just transition for workers leaving fossil fuel industry. So a transition to clean energy.
Exactly. So that's exactly. And those are things, climate justice falls under environmental justice, right? Because climate talks about your environment, as does someone mentioned transportation. So transportation.
Safe, affordable housing as well, hunger. And we have immigrant refugees in New Mexico and Texas.
Immigration justice, food justice. Yes, those are good. Those are excellent, actually. And all of those fall under the umbrella of environmental justice. So it takes it, that's another component of environmental justice, in addition to just disproportionate health effects, right? It's a social movement that encompasses a number of other areas. So I just wanted to sort of like get everybody's take on that. So the nation as a whole has become cleaner in the last 70 years, and particularly with this pandemic, but that is temporary, right? That's only as long as this pandemic lasts and we don't have cars on the road and we don't have a lot of facilities that are polluting the environment. However, we do know that a lot of environmental regulations have been rolled back, particularly during this pandemic. So that's something that we need to think about, the relationship of what's going to happen when this is over, right? And how it's going to affect people. Now, these are the people who are going to be, who are affected by, or who are at risk from environmental exposure. Homeless, people who work outside, infants and children, people with chronic medical conditions, older adults, athletes, everybody who's exposed to the environment, right? People living in traditionally, just everybody. Now, let me go back one. So a lot of these are the same people who are at risk from COVID-19. If you go to CDC's website, interesting, right? So this is what I'm saying when I say that environmental justice affects us all, and it is all of our responsibility to address it. Because think about it this way: whenever you decide on some particular policy, assume that the first group of people that are going to be affected are going to be the frontline communities, the grassroots organizations, the vulnerable population, whatever terminology you're used to hearing. Eventually, that issue is going to affect you. Years ago, I've been working in environmental justice for about 30 years, and years ago, people weren't really concerned about environmental issues or clean air, clean water, because they were like, well, that's an issue over there and I'm over here. But pollution doesn't know to stop at the fence line, right? It's going, the water contamination in the water system doesn't know to stop. Now we have the red tide, we have blue-green algae contamination, all of the things that affect the things that we enjoy doing, So we have to think about, when we think about how we're going to address issues from a policy perspective, from an activist perspective, whatever, think about who's going to be at risk. You always have to ask yourself that question. And then, because our ultimate goal is justice and fairness for all living things, right? And so any decision that we make or any action that we take, we need to consider and actually plan that we are addressing the issue for everybody and not just for a select part of the population. Thank you. I don't know if we're taking questions now or at the end, maybe, huh?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hollis. And we finished a little bit ahead of schedule, so we have some time built in for questions if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask, or they can also just type it in the chat if they prefer.
Looks like
there are no
might have a
questions.
question.
That means everybody agrees with me.
And that was the question. Those were golden hands of applause that I picked up there. Good job.
We have a question here from Louis Sandberg. It looks like they want to know, what about international issues?
Yes, I was just focused on the US, but of course we have international issues. We can talk right now about the locusts in Africa, right? And how that's affecting the population and impacting already a condition where there's already a lack of food and lack of nutritious food. And that's only one of the small things. It's we can talk about the people who are migrating from countries, not just because of climate change, but because of unsafe situations, and that they're coming here, or people who are forced to migrate because of climate change. All of those things are environmental justice issues. Yes.
I don't know if you can see the chat, Dr. Hollis, but they say, they ask because of the friends from Uganda are all suffering from starvation because of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there and here also, right? Because if you think about I'm sure we've all seen in the news, cars lined up to get food from food banks and whatever. Think about people who don't have transportation to go to the food banks, right? What are we doing with them? What are we doing with homeless people? So, and imagine in other countries that are not even as advanced as we are, with all the myriad of problems that we have, that it's 10, 15 times, 20 times worse in other countries.
Thank you so much for that. We do have another question from Adam Goodman. Which recent EPA rollbacks do you view as the greatest threat to environmental justice at this time?
Oh, that's a great question. But it's a hard question because I think they all are. But right now, to me, the most imperative one is where EPA decided to pretty much give polluters permission to pollute. They decided not to fine them, and to say that it was because if the polluters say, if the facilities say it's because of COVID-19, then they won't be fined. How easy is that? I'm telling you what to say so that I won't fine you. So that's a concern. the issues around the National Environmental Policy Act, which was the first law that allowed communities to participate in policy decisions, is a big issue, as are all of the rollbacks that are protective of protecting the public. So, and I think there are over 100 now, or we're approaching 100 maybe.
I have a question.
If there were, oh, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Hollis, thank you so much. I enjoyed your talk. My name is Gwen Hansen.
Hi,
And
Gwen.
my question is, I heard a really great interview with AOC. This was a long time ago, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with Chris Hayes. And in that talk, she talked about how obviously the Green New Deal is not like, we all would love the Green New Deal to be enacted, but it's not like it's one law. It's like it's going to be lots of different laws. And my question for you is, if you could wave a magic wand and make 3 laws appear, become law in Congress, what would the first 3 laws that you would pick be?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. And the first one that comes to mind is that no facility is allowed to pollute, to release any pollution, any. There are no safe levels. So that's the second one, I guess. There are no safe levels. There are no safe levels when it comes to cleanup. There are no safe levels when it comes to release. So therefore, no one is allowed to pollute. You find the best available technology that's the safest for communities, and that's safest for the public. And safe means no pollution, not safe levels. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The second one would be, after that one, I think we'll be okay. The second one will actually deal more with the economic impact of this disproportionate health effects, right? I mean, disproportionate exposures, is that we need to figure out a way to bring all of our communities, even our rural communities that don't have access to health care or food or whatever, we need to come up with a way or develop a way so that equity is front and center, so that we bring people up, give them what they need to be in a position to get what they need to be safe and healthy. And that includes food, that includes access to medicine, access to physicians, that includes a safe job, that includes transportation to and from work. That's the second. The third is, the third is very clear for me. There will be we don't imprison people migrants when they come to the US. That is just anathema. That is against the law. It is against the law. I mean, we're basically encouraging concentration camps. So yeah, those would be my first 3 off the top of my head. You should have told me that earlier, then I would have.
I wish
Very good questions. I'm going to use that. So.
Great. We have another question from Cliff.
If and only if we have extra time, this is a little off task. Dr. Hollis, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how COVID-19 is both an example of climate change, a product of climate change, but also sort of a parable and object lesson on climate change. And there are 3 elements of it in terms of that relationship. That infectious diseases spread over wider ranges and are greatly enhanced by climate change. 2, that the pollution that actually makes us so susceptible in part to COVID-19 are the pollution particles that the virus can attach to. But then there's a third thing, that new disease emergence specifically is made possible because we have created this society that is globally linked with just-in-time supply chains and rapid transit by airplanes. But more than that, that climate change increases the chances, the occurrences of crisis, severe weather, starvation, people being in close juxtaposition to each other, struggling to survive, and people being in much closer juxtaposition to wildlife, where they end up with crossover viruses. But I wanted to know, in terms of this third one of emergence of new diseases, do you also see, in your opinion, that climate change creates our environment, our world, as more of a petri dish that is more likely to give rise to unique genetic combinations? So those others were secondary means, but the global warming itself is a primary means. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, gosh, I do have thoughts on it. I don't have scientific data on it, but I do feel like, I mean, I can give an example, just a simple example, that climate change, for example, has led to flooding in a lot of areas and also chronic flooding. In that you have homes that have mold. Some could be black mold. This makes people more susceptible to viruses or whatever that they may not have been susceptible to before. But now it's an opportunistic infection and their immune systems are weakened. So I believe that to be the case. I also believe that because of climate change itself and the fact that the variations in temperature and the different types of severe weather and all of the climate change effects that we're seeing, I do feel like it makes us, it does create the perfect storm, if you would, for new diseases to be not necessarily introduced, but become so, to have such an effect that, I mean, they may have been around forever and we just didn't know because we didn't have all of these other effects. So I think that climate change is an opportunistic threat multiplier, so I agree.
So we've got time for another question. One more question, perhaps, if anybody would like to ask anything of Dr. Hollis. Donna,
ahead.
you're ahead. You can unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yep.
My work is with the immigrants in Juarez and in Palomas. And right now, like you said, unjustly in those detention centers, which now are full of COVID-19. And what rights do they have? None. And they're living in this environment. And that's a real issue here. It's a hot issue here. And our group does our best in trying to get things to them, but it's just a mess, and there's not anything that seems to be getting done about that. In my other issues in Palomas is where it's sex trafficking. There are young ladies that come over, the unaccompanied young adults that come, and they're there. We call them the coyotes. They're the organized crime. They just, it's like ants. Just waiting to attack, and how that can be overcome.
Yeah. But do you have a question? I mean, I'm sorry.
I was just sharing.
Okay. I didn't want to miss anything. Okay. Yeah.
No,
I was just speaking with a colleague of mine about the fact that we aren't doing anything. Nobody's talking about what's happening in the concentration camps on the border. All of a sudden, like, why is it not in the news? I mean, we're only recently hearing about what's going on in the prison system, and actually the discussion has been around the male prisons. We haven't even touched on what's been going on in the female prisons. So I totally agree with you that these issues have not received the attention that they so desperately need.
Part of it, I hope, is that we've had some ceasefires because of COVID-19.
That we've had some
ceasefires.
Like how? I mean, what do you mean by that?
I mean, some areas of conflict have declared a temporary ceasefire while they deal with the virus.
Oh, okay. But we still have people in these holding cells.
Right. We still have crazy people with guns in Michigan.
Right. That's right.
This is one of those things where we could have a whole nother webinar on this, but in the interest of time, we'd like to introduce the next speaker. Kelly will introduce Roberto here in just a second.
Yeah, so as I explained before, Roberto is the Associate Director of Warehouse Workers for Justice. Roberto, would you like to tell us a little bit about your experiences outside of Chicago?
Yeah, so and once again, thanks for having us. We're glad to be here and talk about this topic. And what I'll talk about a little bit's the intersection around labor and community justice within environmental justice. So our organization was started back in 2008, and it was in response to the creation of the largest inland port in the country, which is on the old Joliet Arsenal land. The Arsenal provided munitions for much of our war efforts during World War II and Vietnam, and then was decommissioned. It's about 25,000 acres of land, so it's a lot of land. And there's always a debate about what to do with it in the area, because it was once one of our largest employers and then went away, and people saw it as a way to do some kind of manufacturing or some kind of industry. What ended up happening is three things were created with this land. Part of it became the Medewan Prairie, the largest national tallgrass prairie in the country. Another part of it became the Abraham Lincoln Cemetery. And then the last part of it became what's the largest inland port in the country, Center Point. So Center Point is a 7,000 acre project that's full of train intermodals. So the literal meaning of intermodals is the change of transportation. And so it goes from the train yards to trucks. So when we're talking about trucks, we're talking about over 10,000 trucks a day. And this thing is massive. It's 7,000 acres. It's over 300 warehouses in the area, a who's who of Fortune 500 companies. And it's it's just a massive project. Joliet and Elwood it's about 40 miles southwest of Chicago, our day's drive from about 60% of the country. And we're at the end of the supply chain, the global supply chain that comes all the way from Southeast Asia. So as manufacturing's moved over to Asia more and more, these kind of logistics hubs are even more important. And so we move billions and billions of dollars worth of goods. Their overall intermodal network in Chicagoland distributes $3 trillion worth of goods a year, but Will County is definitely the heart of it now. So we got into this because of labor rights, and we've seen wage theft, and I mean wage theft at places like Walmart and big companies like this. Bissell Vacuum Cleaners was one of our first campaigns, and they don't have directly hired people. They're through staffing agencies and third-party logistics companies. We saw discrimination, and it's the typical discrimination against brown and black workers, but it got deeper than that. Staffing agencies would use code words. So like they'd use lights and heavies. So a light would be a female and a heavy would be a man. And they would distinguish that and take away employment. They would call the Latinx workers soccer players would be the code word, and then the black workers basketball players. So like it's actually this baseless. And a long story short is we've been fighting the warehouses in corporate America for years, but we found out that a lot of the community members, environmental justice communities, also had grievances. So we came together with them over fights around new warehouse developments and huge tax breaks. Elwood, Illinois, which is at the heart of this distribution networks, they've given such generous tax breaks. They're now $38 million in debt. The infrastructure is falling apart. The bridge, that's the main bridge that goes into the intermodal, is rated a 7 and 9 out of 100 for safety. And in context, the Minneapolis bridge, which collapsed, was 50 out of 100. And pollution, 8% of the local population in Will County's had new asthma diagnosis. So what we found out is we are more powerful fighting with environmental justice communities, that we are stronger together, and that we can build more power together. So we've been at the heart of, I've worked with Caleb here from the diocese in the area, and we did an Earth Day coalition with labor and community groups. We're fighting with, we did a whole series of events, Earth Day to May Day, because we want to strengthen the connection between between environmental justice communities and labor groups, because we know that the people who um, oh, the people who disregard our environment uh, also disregard, they have unsustainable practices with workers as well. So we're stronger bounding together. And with the COVID-19 crisis, we're going to need serious government intervention, economic intervention to get out of this mess. Why not have a Green New Deal that helps workers out? Why not convert some of these trucks and build these trucks here to sustainable infrastructure, to electric trucks that are powered by renewable energy, especially for short trips? They call it drayage in the port area. It's totally doable. The technology exists. Let's reinvigorate our economy. So we are definitely invested in trying to work on these intersections between labor and the environment. And we have to come together more than ever. I think COVID-19 shows that we need each other. We're going to need government programs and intervention to get out of this mess. Let's do it. Let's create jobs. Let's get people working. But let's also make it so that we have a sustainable future. And I'll just comment on warehouse workers during COVID-19 before I move on, is that, a lot of other industries are decimated right now. In Walmart and Amazon, the workforce is actually growing. Amazon has added 100,000 workers. They're going to add another 75,000 workers on top of that. Amazon's by far the largest employer in our huge warehouse hub. There's over 8,000 Amazon workers and growing. So they're the biggest employer in the entire county where we're at. Walmart's expanded its workforce by 10 or 15%. So some of the retailers in specific parts of the supply chain are actually growing in employment and importance in the economy. And warehouse workers shouldn't have to get sick or be in danger or sacrifice their lives so that we can all be sustained. But they are in danger right now. So I just want to, when we see warehouse workers organizing, Amazon workers standing up, let's let them know we have their back. Let's have the back of essential workers and work towards changing our economy in the long run for a more sustainable one. So we're with you. Thank you so much for letting me say a few words.
Thank you again, Roberto. And if I can, what's your last name? Or maybe do you want to just share your information briefly in the chat for folks?
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. And then if there's a website or some way that they could get involved if they're in the Illinois area or get more connected with your
Definitely.
group. I do just have one question and then we'll move on to our next speaker. As you mentioned at the very end, you said, find a way to support folks. I mean, in this time when we still can't go out in many areas, we're under lockdown still ongoing. How would you best recommend for folks that want to get involved in supporting the work that you're doing and in their areas?
Yeah, so we've, to be quite frank, is that, the reality for warehouse workers is they're not socially distancing. It's impossible now, a lot of these workplaces to do so. So I think we shouldn't lose sight that some people are really risking their lives right now to keep this whole society going. And, so we've done at least 2 socially distanced, 3 actually socially distanced protests. So we try to stay, we say it's okay if you stay in your car and just honk and have some signs. Some of us do get outside and make sure we separate. We've done car caravan protests. Follow us on Facebook and find out when the different activities are. We're still doing call-in days. We're still doing informational events. So follow us on Facebook. Just find out ways to plug into different groups. We're part of a national network, Athena. It's Athena for All. I'll try to find that website. So, there may be a group in your area that you can also support when people are participating in labor actions.
That's most excellent. Thank you again, Roberto. And maybe at the end of the call, if anybody has further questions, we have some time to stay on just to answer whatever might come up. With that said, I'd like to introduce Karen Russell. Very excited to have her tonight. We connected back in February through Citizens Climate Lobby, which is an organization that focuses as a grassroots organization focused on building political will and supporting federal carbon pricing. And Karen got her start in Chicago, I believe it is, northwest suburbs, back in 2016, and then moved to Bellingham, Washington to start. She's ending a co-lead chapter of the chapter there in Bellingham of CCL, as well as involved with the Sunrise Movement. And she's got a very passionate sharing. I'm very excited to have her. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, hello everyone. Thanks for having me here. And thanks to Luke and everyone else for organizing. So one of the things that Roberto was saying, of course, is that we're stronger together, right? That means we need to work together. But there's a lot of difficulties and barriers to that. So how do we overcome that, right? How do we get better at working together? And especially, how do people who are from communities that are less affected by a lot of the environmental justice issues, how do we support the communities that are more affected? And so I'm going to start with a story. In Sunrise, we tell a lot of stories. And my story is this. I grew up Christian. I was very involved in my church. It was my entire community. It was my home. I was there all the time. And I especially loved the opportunities that it gave me to help other people and to make a positive difference. And when I was 18, during my freshman year of college, we had, at a Christian school, we had a speaker come to our school who had founded this organization called Dream for Africa. And he was a well-known pastor and author in the Christian community, and he'd spent some time in Africa and decided that he had not been doing enough to help those in need. And one of the biggest problems he encountered was a lack of transparency and dialogue surrounding the AIDS epidemic. So he put together a team to develop a curriculum that was aimed at middle and high school students to educate them about AIDS and to encourage safer sex practices. So he came to my college to talk about this and to ask for volunteers to travel to South Africa and go out to rural schools, I can't talk, and teach this curriculum that they had put together. And about 100 of us said yes. We're going to take a month out of our summer and go and do this. And it was this gigantic production, right? We got help from our churches, we did fundraisers, we worked with our college. There were so many people who contributed time and effort and financial resources to make this big dream happen. Everyone around us was super supportive and enthusiastic. And I remember the rush of feeling like I was part of this incredible thing, the momentum and collective excitement of it all. And on top of that, when we arrived, there were also volunteers from South Africa itself and the surrounding countries who came to teach with us. And we all stayed on the campus of a big church in the Transkei district with people from Zambia and Zimbabwe and Eswatini and Johannesburg and all over the US. And for 4 weeks, we caravanned out to the most isolated villages in the region to teach about AIDS prevention. And it was intense and challenging as all get out. But fundamentally, you know, we were basking in this knowledge that we were doing this great thing. We were literally saving these students' lives. Or at least, that was the message that we were getting from Dream for Africa and from our church families back home and the pastor whose church we were at and even the government officials who helped organize the school visits that we were doing. Unfortunately, the reality, or what's closer to reality, is that the entire enterprise was broadly inadvisable, largely ineffective, and a terribly inefficient use of resources. I happened to be in training as a teacher, but most of our volunteers had zero teaching experience whatsoever. None of us knew much of anything about South African history and culture, or about AIDS. We certainly weren't familiar with the systemic gender dynamics that hugely contributed to the problem. And even most of the African volunteers didn't know the particular culture or primary language of the area that we were in. And I guarantee there were people who brought up these issues somewhere along the way, but the leadership team clearly didn't listen or didn't listen the right way. So unsurprisingly, most of the students we worked with, especially the high schoolers, pretty much just laughed at us. They cooperated for the sake of novelty and not getting in too much trouble with their normal teachers. And the ones who did take us seriously either didn't have the power or didn't have the resources to actually follow the advice that we were giving them. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think the initiative was a total loss, right? Some good was done, but As far as I'm aware, one of the only real success stories that came out of this in terms of lasting progress towards the project's stated goal of AIDS prevention didn't really come from me or my team. It was a result of somebody that we encountered and ended up working with by chance. So while we were out there, we met a woman named Mandisa, and my teaching team met her at the last school that we taught at. She's on the far right of this photo. She was smart and capable and worked hard. Sorry, skipping ahead. So Mandisa had grown up in the village that we were in, right? And when she was younger, she was smart, capable, worked hard, and managed to make it to university in Johannesburg. And then later on, she decided to come back to her village to help make it easier for the young people there to succeed. And for years, Mandisa had been telling these students a lot of the same things that we were telling them now. And not only that, but she continued telling them these things after we had left. She told it to them in their native language. She understood the nuances and limitations of their situations, and she knew what was and wasn't realistic and relevant. Literally, all that she really needed was practical resources and somebody to back her up. Here's what she said in an email to me a few months later. Thank you for coming to South Africa and specifically to my village. You know what it meant to me as I had been praying for a witness, just someone who could come and say that what I had been telling the kids was true. I must say now, the group, the youth group she ran, is so strong, and they are able to tell other kids about these issues. So yes, something good did come out of the trip, but it was only because somebody capable and caring, who was part of the community in question, had already been doing the work day in and day out and continued doing so after we were gone. But the truth is that every student we worked with would have been better off if all of the money and resources that we used to bring 100 American college students to the furthest corner of South Africa for 4 weeks had instead just been given to somebody like Mandisa, or used to provide relevant training and materials to all of the local teachers and community leaders who were already there. Now, think for just a second about, how I might have felt at the time if someone had decided to just be real with me about this. If they had said, hey, hold on a second, you're telling me that you spent how much to fly all the way over here for just 1 month, and you thought you all were going to make a huge dent in the AIDS epidemic? Like, sorry, but did it just not occur to you that there are already a bunch of highly capable people over here working on this who actually know what they're dealing with? Now, I would love to think that an encounter like this would have been this wonderful instant epiphany moment for me, like, wow, you're right, what was I thinking? But let's be honest, humans are emotional beings, and when our worldview is challenged that hard, that fast, we usually don't react super well. So getting around this, right? How do we do that? And I want to do a little bit of an exercise here. I would like you to think of a time when you were trying to help someone else and you worked really hard and you were so sure that you were doing the right thing. And then the person that you were trying to help came over and said, oh no, this is not what I needed at all. Like, this doesn't do any good. So think of a time that happened to you, and maybe it was with a partner, maybe it was with a friend, maybe it was in your church. Hold that experience in your head, think about how that felt, and put in the chat, what was your reaction? Like, what was your emotional reaction? What did you feel? All right. Okay, I don't know if it's working because I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so just to speculate a bit. Oh, thank you, Gwen. So yeah, disrespected. Sorry?
Can you see those? I guess.
Yes, I can. Thank you. So yeah, disrespected, sadness, grief, a little bit angry, right? Anger can make sense, right? You can you feel hurt and you get kind of indignant, right? I spent all this time and effort helping you and you're not even appreciating it, right? Nobody wants to feel unappreciated. Nobody wants to go to all this effort and then told that it went to waste. Okay, so now that you've sat with that one a bit, come at it from the other side. Think of a time when somebody went out of their way to do something nice for you, or at least to try to. And they put in a bunch of effort but they didn't talk to you about it first. And based on the result, they clearly had very little understanding of what you actually needed or wanted. So somebody's trying to help, didn't talk to you first, doesn't go so well. How do you feel when something like that happens to you? Throw it in the chat if you've got something you can, if you've got a scenario in your head. Misunderstood. Yeah, that's rough, right? It's, you know, you are expecting this person to care about you, right? You kind of feel unseen. And they're just completely off base. Oh, that's rough, Luke. So Luke says, I had my boss redo an entire newsletter I'd done and it felt so frustrating, a complete waste. All right, yeah, frustrated. Your needs aren't being met. Amen. That's great. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so the thing is, in this scenario, did your friend or family member, or whoever it was, who was trying to help, did they have bad intentions? Were they trying to disregard you or cause problems for you? Of course not. But at the same time, it's going to be pretty darn hard for you to feel appreciative when your needs still aren't being met. And it's not unfair for you to be upset that they didn't listen to you and work to understand what you wanted before they jumped in with their own solutions. And the thing is, being well-meaning, I think everyone on this call is well-meaning. I think most people are well-meaning, but that's not enough. In the work we do out in the world, whether it's 5 or 5,000 miles from home, we need to listen to the people who are actively experiencing the negative effects of our current systems. Now, that's easier said than done. How do we actually do it? I don't have all of those answers, but I have a very brief start. Number one thing that I've seen that helps is not taking negative feedback personally. Don't assume that you or your good intentions are being attacked. And that's kind of abstract. How do I make it concrete? Learn to catch yourself when you bristle at something. If you're in a group, especially a group where, you know, you're not part of the community you're not a part of the community that is experiencing the issues, and somebody says something that makes you bristle, that's a really good key to, instead of, you know, letting your emotions take over, stop, breathe, listen even harder, and think about it. You might have to process later, but it's a really good thing not to let that get in the way of you doing the work that needs to be done and listening to the people around you. 2 more things, because I'm running short on time. Identify, question, and challenge your own assumptions. Now, going back to the Africa story, we made a lot of assumptions, and the leadership team made a lot of assumptions, and very few of them were actually accurate. One of those assumptions was that my personal presence and effort was more valuable somehow than enabling someone else who is from that community to do the same kind of work. So know that you have assumptions and question them actively and challenge them. Don't make other people have to do that for you. And then this one's a little bit hard to hear, but in mixed groups, don't talk first. It's a pretty simple strategy. You know, if there's something where, you know, if you're in a meeting, if you're trying to plan an event, if you're trying to figure out how to address a certain issue, if you are not, again, central to that community, try sitting back and listening to what the people who are in that community are saying. You'll often find that other people will come out with some of the same ideas you've had, right? And you will wildly increase your chances of getting to hear about something that you might not have thought to consider. So it's valuable, you know, it's a learning experience for you. And you don't have to prove, you know, anything. You don't have to prove that you care. You don't have to prove that you're a good white person, if you are a white person like I am. Listen to the communities that are at the center of the issue. So I know I'm running over, but I just want to, in the interest of listening to the people who are central to this. So how can faith leaders become more involved in environmental justice work? This question was posed to Catherine Flowers. She's the founder of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. And it's pretty simple. Faith leaders can get involved in environmental justice work by first accessing the environmental justice issues in their communities or by providing support to those that are fighting for climate and environmental justice. So doing what this community is asking for is the best way to start if you haven't. And listening more, understanding the problems is incredibly vital to working together towards all of these shared goals.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. Your ending there talks well to our title, which is an ecology of listening. You know, how do we truly listen? So thank you very much for sharing. And in the interest of time, we've got about 5 minutes for questions. If anybody, again, has questions, they can type them or just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Karen, I'm Gwen Hansen. I'm also in CCL here in Bellevue. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us, a little bit about your work with Sunrise.
All right, so I've been working with Sunrise for about a year now, a little bit over. I'm the hub coordinator in my local hub, and we're pretty small, but we do engage in actions with the hubs across Washington. And right now, one of our biggest initiatives is pushing for a people's bailout. So a lot of us are concerned about this overlap between, like Roberto was talking about, and Dr. Hollis as well, about COVID and the climate crisis and how much crossover there is between those issues. And so the people's bailout is a big picture framework to try to make sure that any bailout packages are following certain principles. And I know the first one is that healthcare is the first priority for everybody without exceptions, right? Everyone deserves to be healthy, everyone deserves to be safe. And we're not the first ones to say this. There's a huge coalition working together on this, but that's, I think, one of the biggest initiatives Sunrise is working on right now. And I support that. I do a lot of the background work, right? Just sending emails and collecting data and moving numbers around and so forth, organizing. But it's a lot less glamorous than you would think. But that's what it takes to get it done. And I tell people this all the time. You don't have to be this amazing public speaker. You don't have to be, you don't you don't have to have, a PhD in this or that topic to make a positive difference. Obviously, you want to listen to the people who do have the doctorate, but you can certainly make a difference without it. And I think Sunrise really leans into that. They talk about, we grow our power by talking to our communities. And any 3 people that gets together and does something in the name of Sunrise, according to Sunrise's principles, that is a Sunrise action. It's about being inclusive and bringing more people into the movement. So if you haven't checked those out, I would really encourage, go to Sunrise's website and look at the Sunrise principles. It's a really good framework. And they also reference the Hermes principles in a lot of their work. So if you're not familiar, probably a lot of you are, with the Hermes principles for environmental justice, that's a really, really good resource.
Just quickly about that, Karen, you said the Hermes principles are on the Sunrise website?
Sorry, no, they mentioned the Hermes principles in a lot of their materials, but I think you can just search for Hermes principles. It is J-E-M-E-S, J-E-M-E-Z. And you can just do a Google search, and I think the environmental justice website that has the PDF for that will come right up.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Great. And for those who don't know, again, Hermes principles, there's 17 of them. They're the foundational principles for environmental justice. As Dr. Hollis mentioned at the beginning, it's a very specific set that fit this whole idea of environmental justice. Great. If there are no more questions, and again, we can spend some time at the end if anybody does have pressing questions, but we will go ahead and move on. You can continue typing questions in the end and we'll try to address those at the end, but we want to thank Karen again for her lovely sharing and for her very profound insights. And with that, I'm going to bring it to the part of Laudato Si, because it's Laudato Si week, and So I'm going to kick it off with a connection here with our encyclical from Pope Francis. But just to get a lay of the land here, who's familiar with Laudato Si? You can raise your hand or maybe a thumbs up if we don't have the video on for you. Oh, great, a fair number of you. Excellent. So I'm not going to spend too much time going into the depth of it, but I'm going to be talking about the technocratic paradigm and how to see with a new vision. And so I'm going to share here, but while I do that, I want to invite you to just take some time to come to some silence, because I want to give you a chance to reflect on what you just heard. What did you just hear? So you can think about what just came up for you, spend some time, maybe a minute, in just monitoring what arises you from what you just heard. I'm sure there might be a lot of emotions. Maybe you have a lot of questions right now, but we're going to get into those. So the question is, what did you just hear? This is about an ecology of listening. I think there might be some. Can we all see here? Sorry, maybe I'll just do it. Are we good with the screen? Sorry, you guys.
We've put it on presentation view, maybe.
I can see it just fine.
You can see it just fine. Okay. Oh, sorry. Great. Okay. So everyone is entitled to equal protection. We heard that from Dr. Hollis. And I want to talk about that. What I want to get into is this idea of hearing everything that we heard. It's a lot, right? We have a few emotions that we just experienced. You've touched in with those. And the question then is, now what? What do we do with all this emotion and all this information? I'll tell you, and so will Pope Francis. We redouble our efforts for a new kind of dialogue that includes everyone. Now, I'm sure a lot of us are in this call. It's very hard work. And of course, it can't only be about conversation. Yet as challenging as it is, giving up right now is not the option. I say this because it can't be said enough. In fact, especially in the moment of pandemic that we're in, this call to action is more urgent now than ever, because of all times, this is the worst time to give up. Pope Francis said 5 years ago, "I urgently appeal for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of the planet. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all." I'm going to give you time to actually get interactive here. I'm going to stop this screen share and I'm going to start sharing the whiteboard, because I want us to see what we have to say about these two questions. So I'm going to start sharing this whiteboard. Can you all see the whiteboard? Okay. And there should be a place at the top where it says you are seeing Luke Henkel's screen. And there should be a place that says view and annotate, view options and then annotate. So if you can find that, then you'll be able to draw on this whiteboard. And what we're going to do is an exercise together where the first question, there'll be two questions. The first one is you're just going to draw on this whiteboard. You can write, you can type. Yep, I see some people already doing it. And
That was a mistake.
oh yeah. Well, actually, this is we're gonna use this, Dr. Hollis, because the question is, what is progress to you? This might turn out to be very appropriate. We're gonna just take some time to draw what you think that looks like to you. You can type, there's a text box. Yeah. So take a minute and then feel free to please share your thoughts. What is progress? Oh, I see some very good options or some very good contributions. Better outcomes for everyone, relationship building, moving forward. Hopefully everybody can see all these on their screen. It might be a little bit wonky. Less pollution, yes. Getting closer to God's, yes. Feeling safe, okay. Better outcomes for everyone, safer, better paying jobs. We have lots of movement up. And I'll actually save this and we're gonna move on to our next question. So you can continue jotting these ideas down if you would like. You can take a screenshot if you'd like before I start the new whiteboard. But the next question, acknowledging unfairness and acting on it, great, yep. Working together. The next question will be, what is justice? What is justice? So take some time to think about it. And then we're going to stop this one and start the next question. What is justice? So you can do the same thing again on this new whiteboard. Yeah. Can we all see that?
I don't see a new whiteboard, Luke.
Oh shoot, okay, let's see here.
You may need to clear the annotations with a menu option in Zoom, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Sorry, you guys, create new whiteboard.
There's a clear button in the top corner. Maybe you can try that.
Oh yeah. Clear. Or sorry, this disappeared from me. Maybe we can just share it. Sorry about that, you guys. You can put it in the chat. Instead, how about we do that? I will see the chat here. Great, we have growth towards a better future, equality, yes. Nobody is above the law. Justice is a lack of oppression or exploitation, yes. Yes. Great ideas, absolutely. Justice is considering every viewpoint and position, yep. Justice means right relationships, yep. Absolutely. Justice is considering paying for preschool, not prisons, yes, absolutely, yeah. Great. So these questions are important because we're going to talk about those in terms of what Laudato Si has to say about these things. When it came to progress, we saw lots of upward movement, right? We saw lots of things that were constantly going up. We said the graphs were up, 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 up. And that's important because we have this idea of a technocratic paradigm that I'm going to talk about in just a second. But for now, I want to kind of take a step back because you might have heard these big words and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what is all this? So before I explain what Pope Francis tells us about all this, I want to start with another question. What is a myth that runs our society? We have lots of myths, right? These are stories that we tell ourselves about how the world runs. We have stories about many different things of how the world works, right? These might be some that are familiar with you. One can own land and resources. As a species, we're at our highest creative potential as compared to the past. These are ways that we might operate with the world, right? Growth is good, unlimited growth is better. That was exactly what we saw when people described progress. If you're poor, it's most likely because you haven't worked hard enough. Nature is a stock of resources to be converted to human purposes. Work hard, live well. Don't work hard, live poorly, right? My actions may impact others of the planet, but ultimately nature is more resilient. Anybody resonate with these? If a problem comes along, we can find a technological solution to it. These are myths. These are the technocratic paradigm at work. This is what Pope Francis calls as a myth of society that puts undying faith and confidence in human dominance, market forces, the ironclad logic of technology. In fact, it's more or less a civil religion these days. We talk about technology saving us, right? We talk about human creativity and ingenuity or dominance as something that we praise and laud. We don't have any consequences to our actions. In short, if something bad happens to the environment around us or to another group, nature will take over, or we'll find a way out of it. We'll create a way out of it. They will solve it. We as humans in this paradigm are the show runners, and nothing will stop our show. We take, and there's no consequence for it. But here's the thing. We could maybe develop aerosol clouds to reflect sunlight and lower the temperature. And I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's actually like being promoted. But what does that do to the hundreds of millions of people living in poverty under those clouds? To bring this a little closer to home, many of us might even on this call invest lots of money and time getting the latest green product, right? So we have a slightly smaller carbon footprint. But what about the homeless person on the street who doesn't have enough to eat? When we start to talk about injustice, plenty of people ask how these are connected. When it gets right down to it, progress in this paradigm that we're talking about inevitably means one directional prosperity. We saw that at the very beginning. That's our definition of progress. The issue is great numbers of humanity don't experience that at all. We know about this. We heard this from Dr. Hollis. We heard this a little bit from Karen. The technocratic paradigm is a worldview of necessary inequality and injustice. But Pope Francis makes it clear, all things are interconnected. If you haven't heard that yet, I'll say it again, all things are interconnected. When one suffers, we all suffer. And if we have compassion, we can't happily go green while our brother goes hungry on the street corner. We know that. But Laudato Si says it again and again and again, and it has to be driven home. In fact, Laudato Si uses the words connected or interconnected 22 times in the encyclical. He uses the word justice 31 and poor or poverty or that combination nearly 75 times. And this goes beyond just human to human interaction. It encompasses all of creation, every living being. So we cannot keep on carrying on thinking that we do not have any effect on others. We cannot carry on thinking that we just, carry for some groups over others or forget others because individualism and consumerism will save the day. That perhaps is the most dangerous myth of all. For we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, Pope Francis says, but joined in a splendid universal communion. We understand that progress and solutions in this old paradigm of individuality and consumerism will never get us where we need to be. This is because this paradigm was built on inequality, as we already talked about. So there needs to be a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, and a spirituality which together generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm that was built on injustice and this inequality. In fact, Pope Francis stresses a preferential option for the poor that is no longer an option. It is an ethical imperative essential for attaining the common good. In the present condition of our global society, and we heard a lot about this from Dr. Hollis, and even Karen, and we're seeing in all the news everywhere today, injustices abound, and COVID-19 really brings this to the forefront. Growing numbers of people are deprived of basic human rights like healthcare. We see it immediately on every news article. Water, we hear about it. These people are considered expendable, and then when we talk about them in political ways. We don't talk about them as people. That is injustice. That's directly connected to environmental injustice, because when we don't count them as people, when we don't give them dignity that they are inherently born with, we cannot appreciate them. We only appreciate end results. We only appreciate what we want to get out of a situation. And that is the technocratic paradigm. If we do not do this, even the best ecological initiatives can find themselves caught up in the same globalized logic. To seek only a technical remedy to each environmental problem is to mask the true and deepest problems of this global system in which people do not count equally. He says Pope Francis says there needs to be a change of paradigm shift. We cannot carry on in this lack of awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared with everyone. This basic awareness of our interconnectedness would enable the development of new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life that in turn help us respond more creatively and more fully to those who suffer the most. And this idea of creative solutions is exactly what happens when we have a conversion shift, an ecological conversion, as the Pope calls it, and it begins with awareness. We've talked a lot about that, and Karen mentioned it very, very simply and very easily. It's going to begin with listening. So what is this new way of looking at things? I believe I need to wrap things up here really quickly. So I want to end it with a call to awareness and to reflect on these questions. What does this new paradigm of interconnectedness mean to you? What does the new way of looking at the world around you, given that what we've heard today, include? I would like you to maybe write these questions down or otherwise put them somewhere where you can spend the next week on this, because we will actually be convening again in another week, and we'll explain the details of that here in a minute. But these are the questions that we're going to begin with next week on the 24th of May at the same time, and we're going to really dive into this. The call to action is coming up here soon, and then once you go forth, you'll be able to really understand what it means to operate in this new paradigm of interconnectedness. So that's the goal here, and Kelly will be talking about more of that in just a second. But I want to end with this quote that Pope Francis gives us. The good news is, while we're capable of the worst, we're always capable of the best. Humanity can really be torn apart in crisis. We see this with the pandemic, but it can also always rise above. And so it'll be up to us as to how we want to continue.
Thank you, Luke. That was a nice synopsis of why we should take Pope Francis's words, consider them more deeply this week. So now that we've heard a bit about the environmental justice movement and the call we have from Laudato Si to respond to this interconnected environmental and social issue, we want to move into a space for considering what to do next. One national platform I'll mention, which highlights many of the concerns of environmental justice advocates, is called the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform. And I can put that link in the chat. But it is, they advance the goals of economic, racial, climate, and environmental justice to improve the public health and well-being of all communities while tackling the climate crisis. At this point, we invite you to take a moment and write down some of the things you've learned from tonight's discussion that you can carry with you as an action to take as a next step. It could be a surprising fact or a new idea. And we'll be talking through these in more detail next Sunday, May 24th at the same time, 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. Some examples of ideas you can do are to identify an environmental justice organization in your own community and invite a representative to speak at your parish care for creation committee as part of your parish's Laudato Si action planning. You may also consider educating youth about environmental justice and engaging youth and young adults in Laudato Si Generation, a movement for youth that was started through the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And you can talk to Luke more about that. And so now I'll hand it over to Dr. Cliff Cockram, who is a climate ambassador for Physicians for Social Responsibility. If you would like more information about PSR, you can contact him afterwards. But currently, he will offer some remarks about how we can embark on this path of seeking environmental justice and how it can help us to live our faith more authentically. Cliff?
Greetings. I'm also National Campaign Director of the Climate Emergency Coalition and State Coordinator for CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, ECA, Elders Climate Action, and Tennessee's Global Catholic Climate Movement. I serve on a bunch of committees with the Sierra Club and Environment and Justice for the Tennessee Conference of the NAACP. And all of that is to say that I don't want to talk about any of those things. If anyone wants to, you can approach me offline. We can have a long chat. What I would like to propose is that in the end, this requires more than thinking and talking, requires more than concrete plans. I'm an ex-Jesuit and a member of the lay Cistercians of Gethsemane Abbey, the abbey that Thomas Merton lived and is buried at. And I would like to invite each of you to join with me each day this week in reading a section of Laudato Si and reflecting on it together. So first, no one is obliged. We will be informed by the conversation that we just had this evening, but if someone missed it, that's okay. I think they'll be able to pick up on it just because of who you are as people. And we're going to do that each night, and you don't have to be there every night, because you are as people folks who will connect with it. And in the end, it's not about you've got to do it. I encourage you, if God is speaking to you at this moment in any sense, then listen. The one thing I would say to perhaps persuade you is that I don't think we're going to think our way out of this problem. As Luke said, I don't think we're going to technologically wave magic wands. I don't think we're going to plan our way out. And I don't think banding together the humanitarians of the world are enough. And banding together even the silent Christians who get it, like many of you on this call, aren't enough. I don't think we can do this without God. I also would add, just in a purely sociological sense, in America, the people in churches are the ones that gave us Donald Trump. Republicans are not the enemy. The enemy is white privilege, greed, indifference, consumerism, the unsustainable extractive economies that we've built our society on. And those are the enemies. And I think they're not easily addressed by simply having a great debate or a whole lot of panels. I think it requires conversion of heart and spirit. And so what I'm going to do is ask you, I put in the chat a link to Laudato Si. And unless you really know it by heart, and let me put it to you this way, for months, I was just listening to the automated reading of Laudato Si every day as part of my morning prayer. And you know what? It doesn't get old. There is a lot there. I'm going to say something bold here. If it gets old, something is wrong with the way you're reading it. One of the things we'll do is Lectio Divina this week. And if you know what that is, feel free to jump on, start the call, drop off, do the rest on your own. We're gonna meet at 9 p.m. Eastern time so that people around the country can join us, and it won't be like their work period, like they're just getting out of work. We'll do it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Do it any day and every day that you can. If you miss a day, I will send you what the reading is for the night before. But if you look in the chat, there's a link to a copy of Laudato Si. It's broken out in paragraphs by numbers. And I'm asking you to read especially paragraphs 17 to 61, which is chapter 1, much of which is either part of or assumed in everything we talked about tonight. Maybe nice to read the preface, but most of all, prayerfully read 17 to 61. And then we'll take it up by gathering for prayer at 9. We'll gather with just a short starting prayer. It'll be very ecumenical. I will point out what the reading is for the next night. Actually, we'll start out by pointing out what the reading is for the next night so that we get the homework out of the way. And then we'll take some time to pray and reflect together. So the assignment is to prayerfully read 17 to 61 and come being able to say, what did God say to you as you were reading this? I encourage you to journal, to write something down so that you don't arrive saying, well, no, what did he say to say? No, write down right now. What did God say to you as you were reading it? And write that down as you're reading it. And you know what? If you never get past the first paragraph, that's okay, especially if God said something to you really big about the first paragraph. And if you jump to the end, that's okay. I trust in God in you. And I trust in God in all of us that something will make sense and come out of our good intention to hear God's word, to hear what Pope Francis had to say about it, because in the end, I think it's much more than the words of Pope Francis. You know, there have been 240 encyclicals since 1840 something, and many, many hundreds of other papal letters written before 1840 in different formats. But this is one of the 2 or 3 in history that are the most important. And this one is one of 2 that the Pope wrote to the world. And this encyclical written to the world has been read by vast numbers of all denominations and leaders of all denominations, Buddhists, Hindus, Jews, Muslims, all kinds of Christians have embraced it as being a message that we must embrace. And I assert that the only way to truly embrace it is to take it in your heart and let it be part of transformation. So as we wind down, does anyone have any questions about what I'm asking? Just download it, it's in the chat. Prayerfully read 17 to 61. If you get hooked on something, stay with it. You know, spend the whole, and by the way, if you don't make it to Monday, come Tuesday. If you don't make it to Tuesday, come Wednesday. If you don't make it to prayer the whole time, show up. Maybe God will say something to you because you didn't have time to say something. Maybe that's how God is going to speak to you. We don't know. It's a leap of faith. But let's give it a try, eh? I will email you other things in the interim, but write down where to get a copy of Laudato Si and 17 to 61, as much of it as God allows you to read. Amen. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Cliff. There are some questions here that are popping up. People are wanting to know about the daily connectedness, like the link. And that is actually included as well. So if you scroll up a little bit, you'll be able to see the Zoom link. That will be for tomorrow's meeting, and that will be the same link all week. So you sign up or you log in, and then you use that same Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Other questions? Okay. Kelly, Lee, Luke, anything from you? Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Thank you, speakers, for your part in this. And I hope, if I know you're busy, but if you can drop in during the week, it would be great to have you. Your words were profound, and we appreciate them greatly.
Thank you so much, Cliff. And it's just about 5:30. I don't know if any of the speakers are available to stay for a few minutes afterwards and field any questions that people wanted to ask outside of this call. If you're willing to do that, that would be wonderful for just a few minutes. Otherwise, we thank you so much for your time. We thank you for joining, and please do look for the recorded webinar in the Catholic Climate Covenant newsletter. That will be out in June. And so if you just Google that, you can find the May one and then get connected through to receive the next week's one. And we will also hopefully see you back next Sunday on the 24th at 7 p.m., 4 p.m. Pacific. And we'll go over these action steps, as Kelly was mentioning, and what we can do from here. So we hope to see you next week. If not, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. And wish you the very best evening. Thank you again to all our speakers, and thank you all for joining.
Yes, thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll share something with Karen. Karen, I didn't go into it while you were sharing and asking questions, but in fact, I've spent a lot of time taking people places to try to, quote, make a difference. And I've long been convinced that it's the people who go who get the most out of it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I've gotten to where I see it as a way of converting Americans out of their complacency and white privilege and middle class values.
Oh, and absolutely it is. I think what I was specifically saying was that, the stated goal wasn't achieved, right? I don't think we made a whole lot of difference where we went. Obviously, I'm sure there was a lot of personal transformation on my part and the part of, everyone I was with, but that's not how it was framed. And I think that's important. I think if it's framed as we're going to go and we're going to help these people who, and we're assuming can't help themselves, that's really dangerous. And so that's why we want to be acting in solidarity and not in charity. And I'm sure that's something that you focus on. But it's something that I think the Christian community could learn to do a lot better. And so, yeah, so absolutely, like the trip was not just a complete waste of everyone's time. It was absolutely transformational in a lot of ways. I just don't think it did a whole lot about, the AIDS epidemic in South Africa. It just didn't. Yeah.
It's almost to the point where it's a blessing if your travelers do more good than harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the phenomenon of like volunteerism. And I've even heard reports of, these mission groups going out somewhere to, like, help build houses, and they have no experience with doing any of this. And local people have to literally come in overnight to fix the bad work and rebuild it, So it's like, if your partner or spouse decided, oh, I'm going to help out, I'm going to paint the kitchen cabinets, and they do it so badly that everything is, like the paint's tacky, they didn't know what they were doing, and you have to go back and do even more work than if you had just done it yourself. We don't want to be doing that, right? We want to be listening to, if we're going to come into a community that isn't our own, I think we need to be listening really hard to what are they asking us to come and do. And I think the initiative that we traveled with did a better job. They had some other initiatives that went even less well. At least with this one, the Department of Education did actually want, some outsiders, to come in and kind of say talk about these concepts that were developed in partnership. So a lot of the development happened in partnership, but not the execution, I think.
I was part of a ministry when I was in high school. That the program actually still goes on every year, but it was a mission trip down to Harlan, Kentucky from New York. Mm-hmm. And this every year, and it's, we're going into this community, and it wasn't exactly like, we're coming to be the savior. They did teach us about, like, no, you have to actually listen to the other person, but they didn't teach us about environmental justice. Mm-hmm. I just found it something that is still lacking. I haven't been down to the trip in like 12 years, but just knowing about the coal mines in Kentucky and knowing about the environmental justice issues that happen there, and the fact that we were building houses, we were doing outreach, we were doing vacation Bible school, but we weren't learning about environmental justice. And I wish that even that trip that was a domestic trip focused on poverty had more of an element of environmental justice. And I also wish that we didn't have to go down to Harlan County, Kentucky to experience that. Like, I came after all that experience and decided to work in the Bronx, which is like an hour from this retreat center in New York, because I said, we can't just focus on these poverty issues in the middle of the country. We have to look at what's right in our backyard. And the highest poverty rates in the country are right here in the Bronx. So I think we always have to look at what's in our own backyard. What's in our own communities, what are the environmental justice struggles in our own communities that we have to be looking at.
Absolutely.
That's very beautifully said. I know there's a few of us on the call that might have any questions. I don't know, Louise or Jeff or Janet. Was there anything specific you wanted to ask or share, or?
I have a lot of friends in Uganda. I think I mentioned that before, who never have enough. They're always in danger of disease. Many of them were dying from polluted water, and I managed to raise some money, and we were able to change their situation. So they had clean water available to them. but the COVID-19, nobody that they know has it. But a lot of people they know are starving to death, you know, and their government is not doing anything like what our government is doing. You know, their government is not providing them with any means of supporting themselves. They're just not allowed to work. They're not allowed to go out. They have curfew, and if they are out after curfew, there's very severe consequences. So there's a whole political system on top of it that's not allowing them to sustain themselves, really. It's really desperate, and I'm not hearing it. You know, I don't know if anybody else is hearing it, you know? Like, to me, people are starving to death. Like, we're all hearing about COVID-19, people dying, but people are starving to death. Like, these are people who were working, who were sustaining themselves, who had their own means of livelihood, you know, and they're...
Yeah, that's why we need to consider that food justice has to be part of environmental justice too. I work a lot in food justice in the Bronx, but I also am worried about the locusts in East Africa. You know, like it's such a plague right now that could eat up all of the crops in East Africa, and it's very worrisome. I reached out. There's a Faith for Earth initiative at the UN Environment, and I reached out and I said, you know, what needs to happen? And they said, well, this is how much money the UN has asked, you know, the Food and Agriculture Organization has asked for, and this is how much money, you know, they're getting so far. And governments just, you know, aren't stepping up. There's so much more money that needs to be invested into these efforts. And we also, you know, it's important to think about, you know, food security in emergencies, but we also have to think about long-term food security and how do we invest into people being able to have food security on their own, so that they don't have to rely on emergency food security. So I agree. I think it's definitely a problem that we need to be concerned about and to figure out how we can be in solidarity for our global brothers and sisters.